Gary Pisano, manufacturing has dropped from 30% of the American workforce in 1950 to around 10% today. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, the number in and of itself is not really the problem. The concern that we have is that it's the loss of capability in manufacturing that's making it more challenging for American companies to innovate. So I worry less about the 10%. I don't think we're ever going to be much above 10% of the workforce in manufacturing going forward.
Well, we lost a ton of those jobs to China, companies like Foxconn. Will we ever get that back?
Those jobs, no, because those are some of the lower skilled jobs that require low wages. Those jobs left American shores and they're not coming back, and they're probably not the kind of jobs that we want to have here for Americans to earn decent wages.
How much of a role did the unions play in losing a lot of those manufacturing jobs in especially southern states?
It's relatively small overall. I mean, there's these jobs that moved outside the U.S. to places like China and India and elsewhere. There was just dramatically lower wages because these were emerging economies, and so I think it's the role that unions played in actually causing that, I think, was fairly limited.
What about the role of technology? And the big question is, if manufacturing does come back in America, do we have the type of worker who's correctly skilled to work in the modern manufacturing plant?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the manufacturing plant of today and tomorrow is really different than the one we had 10, 20, 30 years ago. A lot more need for sophisticated skills, and this is an issue. So many people, manufacturing used to be a great place to go if you graduated high school, didn't have a lot of training, a lot of additional education. That's not true anymore, and we hear a refrain all the time from manufacturing executives in the U.S., which is we'd love to hire more, but we're having trouble finding people with the right skills. Statistics, mathematics, programming, I mean, that's what it requires to work in the kind of manufacturing that can thrive in the United States.
And speaking of manufacturing in the U.S., one of the refrains we keep hearing on the campaign trail is, especially from the Republicans, is that the government should not choose which sector of manufacturing we should bring back or we should concentrate on. They talk about Solyndra as a place where the U.S. lost money, trying to choose a manufacturing winner. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it's very hard to pick specific industries, and we don't advocate that in our work. We think government can play a role in building basic capabilities, investments in research, investments clearly in training, as we just talked about. But it's really hard for government to be a good venture capitalist. It's hard for venture capitalists to be good venture capitalists. It's tough to pick winners. Picking specific companies is subject to all sorts of problems. And our history in the U.S. shows we don't do that well. Governments generally don't do that well.
On the other hand, it seems like the auto bailout did fairly well, at least at this point. What's your view?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, that sort of flew in the face of kind of bailing out a particular sector. I have to say in our writing, we were not really that crazy about the specific role the government played. We think there were some better ways for that to occur. It was an unusual time, though. I mean, in retrospect, in terms of the capital markets freezing up, no alternatives in terms of the right kind of bankruptcy. So that might have been a special exception, a special circumstance where unusual government intervention was required. But in general, going forward, I'm not that comfortable with government getting involved with specific companies that fail. There's a lot of ways that could go wrong in terms of government, a black hole for taxpayer money. So I think we got to be careful about the lessons from the auto bailout, although in retrospect, clearly it turned out to be a great thing.
All right, so what is your plan? How do you avoid those black holes in the future? What's your plan?
Look at our history in the U.S. Government has done really well and has supported the U.S. economy when it's invested in basic and applied research and training and education. And 50 years ago, 60 years ago in the United States, we created things like the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, to make major investments in science, which propelled our growth in the post-war period. We need to do the same kind of thing for manufacturing. Government has to start investing in the basic and applied research, in advanced manufacturing technologies, new process technologies, and worker training. And that will set the stage for the next several decades. It's not going to solve a jobs problem next year. And I know that's in politics. Everybody wants to, what's next year's job figure? What can we do next year? It's a longer term situation.